Hello and welcome back to another episode of Navigating Adulthood and IDD. So it's a little after the fact, but there are all things Olympics going on recently. There were a lot of new events this year, including skateboarding, which I got really into, and surfing was pretty cool. And, there was all of the different drama in the sports of the winners and their kind of stories and narratives that were interesting to watch. And of course, there was this Simone Biles saga and really the importance of mental health and the effects of mental health on not only our mental health, but our physical health, and how she really advocated for herself this year and became this kind of very important role model for us to all kind of look at and aspire. And so there were a lot of great moments in the Olympics for all countries this year. I really liked, again, the skateboarding was so cool to watch all the different tricks, and it was just really neat to see different athletes beat different records, no matter where they were from. Just see them beat their personal best sometimes is what I really enjoyed watching with the Olympics. And so, of course, with the Olympics and all that going on, my brain kind of went to, where are the disabled athletes? As I have gotten more into disability culture recently with this podcast, with my career. This was probably one of the years I've watched more Olympics than the past, to be honest. So that kind of piece came into my brain for sure. And I had heard about the Paralympics, but never really looked into it. So for today's kind of mini podcast episode, I wanted to talk about the Paralympics and different competitions for disabled athletes, including their role in the Olympics, and kind of go from there and discuss just a little bit, share some resources. It's another solo episode, and I really want to talk about Olympics and disabled athletes. So there are actually 3 different games for disabled individuals. Specifically, there's the Paralympics, which are, I think, most well known. At least I knew that one more than the others. There's the Deaf Olympics, which is for deaf individuals, DEAF, deaf. And then there's the Special Olympics World Games. Sometimes intellectual disabilities aren't necessarily in the Paralympics unless that's a category. And Special Olympics is kind of more specialized for intellectual disabilities. And then, of course, there are athletes who do participate in the Olympics. An example this year was Natalia Partyka, and she is a Polish table tennis competitor who was born without a right arm and has been very competitive in table tennis in the Olympics and in the Paralympics. And she did compete this year for the 2020 Tokyo, even though it's 2021. But yeah, so they can be in the Olympics, because that was a question of mine too, is are they allowed to be? And they are. You make it past the qualifications for each sport, and each sport has all these different rules and organizations, a lot more than I never really thought of the logistics side of the Olympics, to be honest. So it was like, oh wow, this is very kind of intricate how this works out. But I kind of found an interesting article about the Olympics and the Paralympics I want to share too. So this is an article from 2016, back when the Olympics were in Rio, and it's an article that says why the Olympics and Paralympics are still separate events. And it's a whole piece on how some people think that they should combine the Olympics and the Paralympics, because the Paralympics don't get as much coverage or funding as the Olympics. But then some athletes want the events separate. And so I don't know where I stand necessarily. I think that's really for disabled athletes that's their discussion, that's their opinion, what would be better. But it's interesting read, because, one disabled athlete is saying if he was in the Olympics, he'd have more airtime if they were combined events. And what's interesting is that I think since 2001, in 2001, the Paralympics started occurring alongside the Olympics in the same city. So before they were like super separate, and now they're kind of in the same city, but they don't get covered at the same time. And so that's the idea, is that they should kind of happen at the same time, so that there's this more coverage, and less kind of segregation. But again, it's not it's not one of those issues that's so like black or white, because logistically then you're doubling, or if you're combining it, you would need a bigger athlete village and would need more space. But on the flip side, the Paralympics don't get as much funding, so then people who qualify for it might not be able to participate. So it's interesting, and it's interesting to see that kind of difference where it's like, oh yeah, it makes sense, societal wise, that the Olympics is getting a lot more funding than the Paralympics. But why not support our Paralympic athletes and cheer on beating their personal best records? And it's the same spirit, just different ability or different bodies, at the end of the day, different individuals, but they're still doing these sports that we could be cheering on for our country and other countries, just the same, in the same spirit of the Olympics. So it's interesting. And I've watched the Paralympics a little bit in the past. Again, I'm not really big into sports, if we're honest. I'm not athletic. So I've only watched so many Olympics in the past, and then a little bit of Paralympics too. So, but I'm excited because I'm going to definitely check it out. It's August 24th. And I'm going to really check into it this year, at least at the same level I watched the Olympics, because I want to see, where are the similarities, where are the differences in logistics, or in even like the sports that they play. But then again, hear those individual stories. Watch people beat their personal best times. It's the same spirit, just with disabled individuals. And it's interesting too, because obviously the Olympics is about like pushing our bodies to like crazy limitations, things that people wouldn't think were possible before. And so there is almost an ableist kind of foundation to the Olympics, because at the end of the day it's really celebrating kind of different things the human body can achieve, which is super interesting, I think, first of all. But also, not all the competitions are like that, but a lot of them are kind of like, how can we push our body? But, I think Simone Biles and that kind of narrative and story into shows that there's more to Olympics, there's more to being a champion than just pushing our bodies to the wildest, unhealthiest places. And instead, what about just doing, like, beating your personal best, being on a team, all the good things of sports, and really focusing on those and trying to move away from ableist, unhealthy worth ethics. There's a lot of that was in the Olympics prior, and I think this is a shifting point in the Olympics and maybe society, and that's my opinion, about how maybe we're recognizing we don't need to be workaholics. We don't have to push our bodies to unhealthy points. And I think the Paralympics could help celebrate that fact too, because we're celebrating disabled athletes and their wins and their accomplishments. And there's so many other things on sports to focus on than like, that was the absolute fastest time ever, and we should always work out all day and go wild and unhealthy, and or get really, really upset when we lose. And there's definitely a balance of mental health with that. And I think we could celebrate different bodies achieving different feats that are just as cool as maybe watching somebody be the fastest sprinter. That's my opinion, at least. Again, I'm not very athletic, but I'm really excited to watch the Paralympics and to learn more about who the athletes are, because that's one thing I really enjoyed about the Olympics too, is like being like, oh, there's a 14-year-old skateboarder in Brazil, and like they've been training their whole life, and I wonder, and now it's like, oh, if I watch the Olympics again and I see those same skateboarders, then you can kind of follow their story. And I think that's what's more intriguing to me, is following these athletes' stories, and that's what I look forward to at the Paralympics as well. Because I think the Paralympics can or could fall into inspiration porn, depending how you watch it. If you're watching it and taking pity on people because they are in a wheelchair or, whatever. I think that's the wrong attitude to go into watching the Paralympics. I think it's just learning about each person and their story and, what was their personal best and, did they beat it? Or, kind of focusing on those parts of athletic sports versus like, wow, they did that despite blank. And that's not my opinion. I don't believe that you should watch with pity or to be like, wow, they did that even though, but to just watch it in that same spirit of the Olympics, of really celebrating the individuals and the countries and people coming together and watching the different sports. I think that it could be watched in that same spirit of the Olympics, because it's not, well, I guess I was like, you don't take pity on people in the Olympics, but anytime anyone has a false start, I feel kind of bad. So false starts, you can feel bad, but otherwise, these are just athletes doing their thing, and we can kind of watch them do their thing. I think is really that spirit, but I think definitely an interesting point to consider with the Paralympics, and to kind of watch ourselves and our biases and the thoughts that come up, because there is so much ableism in our society. So you might be like, oh wow, I can't imagine XYZ, and those are the moments to kind of be like, oh wow, like where did that thought come from? Why do I have that thought? Where does that fear come from? And kind of explore our own ableism. But yeah, they're on August 24th. And I'm really excited to check out the Paralympics and the different events and learn about the different athletes. But yeah, the data at the end of the article, which I'll put in the show notes, said that 65% of disabled people in 2011 were in favor of scrapping the Paralympics and instead allowing disabled athletes to compete in the Olympics. 42% of disabled people said they disagreed that the Paralympics positively impacts the public's perception of disabled people, while only 1 in 5 said that the Paralympics makes disabled people appear to be second class. It's very split. 65-42, those are very split numbers, and it's an interesting topic and a good point of like what is the better way to organize it. And I definitely am not the person with that solution, but just kind of want to pose that thought to you of like, oh, do we make it more inclusive, or is it more important for them to have their own space, or maybe a mix, maybe a hybrid, something existing in the middle. But I think either way, if you're really into the Olympics, that same spirit's in the Paralympics, and maybe ask yourself, why don't you tune into that one? Or if you do, awesome. Let me know what are your favorite events in the Paralympics, or who are the athletes to look out for. Again, I am not a part of this athletic world, so usually it's like all new information for me. So feel free to send me an email at bonnie@rhythmicrootsmusictherapy.org, or send me a message or comment on Instagram if there's something in the Paralympics I really need to check out or be in the know for this year. So yeah, I think with that we can start kind of wrapping up a little bit, but I will definitely put the article in the show notes and maybe some Wikipedia articles on the disabled athletic events. And yeah, let's just bring that same energy to the Paralympics that we watched when we watched the Olympics. Bring that same level of respect. See people achieve new athletic records for themselves. Not to have pity, but to cheer on our country and other countries, competing with each other, cheering each other on after events, and celebrating disabled bodies and different bodies. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So I am super excited to check that out, and hope you will too. And until then, I will catch you next time. This podcast is by Rhythmic Roots Music Services, LLC, with content and music by Bonnie Haupt. Transcriptions are made by my favorite little sister, Emma Haupt. Thanks for listening.